I presume you're here in order to learn of Magecraft. I'll have you know, there's no room for the weak-willed in this course, and despite your best efforts, the sorcery of our time is but a fraction of what it once was in the Age of Gods. Much of the craft is established through Pedigree, and the culture of mages is riddled with deception and moral depravity. That said, if you insist, I shall do my best to educate you in this miserable, yet fascinating world.
In our previous lesson, I covered a handful of thaumaturgical systems mages built their craft upon. Admittedly, many of those systems were Western in origin, and it's worth noting that mystery is not bound to any one culture. In particular, there are many systems originating from the Far East that also hold significance in the world of mages. To begin exploring these Asian styles, I would like to dedicate this lesson to the various forms of magecraft derived from Taoist philosophies, namely Philosophy Magecraft, Feng Shui, and Onmyodo. As a general overview, Taoism is both a religion and philosophy that originated from ancient China, specifically from a collection of poetry known as the Tao Te Ching, or The Way and Its Power. This book, most associated with philosopher Lao Tzu during the year 500 BC, hopes to guide humans and animals into living in balance with the universe by altering their thoughts and actions. Its roots are so strong in Asian culture that more than one thaumaturgical system has emerged from Taoist teachings. Arguably the most powerful of these systems is called Philosophy Magecraft, or Thought Magecraft. Expanding beyond China, it is practiced across continental Asia and the Middle East. The creators and practitioners of this prominent magecraft are beings called Xian, immortal Taoist sages from the Age of Gods. Some Xian are born into this category, such as the Genren Yu Mei Ren, an incarnated elemental who served as the consort of Lord Xiangyu. Other Xian ascend to this immortal status through training in the Xian arts, such as Taigong Wang. The origins of Xian trace back to a mystical tree known as the Fusang tree. Also called the Tree of Life, the Fusang tree is a crystallization of the Xian secrets, as well as a treasury of wisdom regarding all manner of life. True Xian, the ones born with this power, are said to be divided spirits of the Fusang tree. In addition to their arts, many Xian also utilize mystical tools called Baobei. The famous sage Taiyi Genren created such Baobei in the form of Netza's body, as well as her iconic weapons. This pertains to Philosophy Magecraft because it was originally created by the 10 Xian officials of the Summit Court. By working together, they designed this form of thaumaturgy, not based on the root, but around a gigantic mystic code fused with the planet called the Philosophy Foundation. While Western Magecraft relies on formulating a spell along the planet's mana ley lines, Philosophy Magecraft is channeled through the Philosophy Foundation at specific locations called privileged domains. They can only be accessed through philosophy keys connected to the original 10 founders. For the most part, Philosophy Magecraft has been lost to the modern era, but in the Chinese Lost Belt visited by Chaldea, the ruler Qin Shi Huang used the remains of Netza's body to transform himself into an artificial Xian, presiding over the country while the Fusang tree assimilated with one of the alien gods' fantasy trees, Mayal. In this manner, he helped preserve the Xian arts for over 2,000 years, using its secrets to cure his people of pestilence. Despite the fallout of Philosophy Magecraft, it is still cherished by a Chinese organization called the Spiral Manor. It is essentially China's parallel to the Mages Association, and thanks to both styles being incompatible, both the manor and association maintain a non-aggression pact. Returning to Taoism in general, we must consider the philosophy of Feng Shui. Translating to wind and water, it represents the idea that human life is connected with the ever-changing flow of our environment. Feng Shui operates on the principles of the Bagua, as well as the 5 Taoist elements of wood, fire, earth, water, and metal. Bagua translates to 8 areas, and describes 8 regions gathered around a central point. Much like signs of the zodiac, the Bagua each have multiple meanings, tied to colors, elements, shapes, and values. In all, there is Zhen for family, Xun for wealth, Tai Chi for health, Qian for camaraderie, Dui for children, Gen for knowledge, Li for fame, Kan for one's path in life, and Kun for partnerships. In terms of practical application, Feng Shui isn't specifically used for any given spell, but we can see it combined with astrology and fortune-telling by the spellcaster Pfluger. By arranging knives representing the zodiac signs, Pfluger creates zones of good and bad luck. This is closely affiliated with bounded fields, and has been used as a form of defense against attack spells. Rather than Feng Shui itself, the more famous thaumaturgical system, Onmyodo, is a derivation of Feng Shui. Technically, Onmyodo is a Japanese variant of China's system based around the yin and yang, and is often applied through divination and curses. Its most famous practitioner was Abe no Seimei, an onmyoji of Japan's Heian period. When Oni gathered at Mount Oe, and human victims began disappearing from the imperial capital, it was Abe no Seimei who divined that Shuten Doji was the culprit. This led to the Oni on Mount Oe being slayed by Minamoto no Raiko and her 4 heavenly kings. Abe no Seimei was also the one responsible for exposing Tamamo no Mai as a fox spirit to Emperor Toba, leading to her being hunted and killed by imperial guards. With these two accounts being over 100 years apart, it is believed that he had an extended lifespan from being mixed blood between a human and some other phantasmal creature. The Onmyoji Ashiya Doman refers to himself as Abe no Seimei's rival. He was a Buddhist priest and an enemy of the Japanese government, known for wicked plots such as cursing Fujiwara no Michinaga. While Ashiya and Seimei were once allies in the Bureau of Onmyo, they went on to clash as 2 master spellcasters. In his own way, Ashiya Doman is also immortal, to an extent, thanks to using the secret arts of Hakudo Jonin. Murasaki Shikibu, the Japanese novelist most famous for the tale of the Genji, was a pupil of Abe no Seimei. As such, she learned spells that would vanquish her foes. During life, she was lackluster in her own Myodo, but these skills received a significant boost when summoned as a caster heroic spirit. To activate her spells, Murasaki draws pentacles, also referred to as Seimei stars. A more obscure practitioner of Onmyodo is the Tengu sage Kichi Hogen, most famous for teaching the art of war to Ushiwakamaru. Similar to a Genren, Tengu are a species of elemental affiliated with mountains, skies, and fire. Most Tengu don't associate with humans, but Kichi Hogen proves to be an exception, founding the swordsmanship Kyohachi Ryu at Kurama Temple. This means that they balanced their own Myodo with martial arts and military strategy. Much like philosophy magecraft, Onmyoji have almost no connection to the Mages Association. Or rather, overlap is extremely rare. I can point to at least one example where they overlap, with the Yiga de Millennia faction dabbling in it, though that is likely to do with the faction being made up of various struggling mage families. While Western magecraft can involve the summoning of familiars to do one's bidding, the Onmyodo equivalent are the Shikigami. These creatures share a spiritual connection to their master, performing a single type of curse through a shared contract. More specifically, Shikigami are not actually living creatures, but are instead created when an Onmyoji pours mana into an otherwise ordinary object. Their contract comes with being given a true name that ties a Shikigami to its master. One example is Mashiro, the nickname of a Shikigami created by Kasumi Hiragi. Originally in the form of an owl with the true name Oboro Tsukio, Mashiro took on the form of her master, and now acts as a false substitute for Kasumi during a Holy Grail war held in Tokyo. Abe no Seimei was said to have created 12 Shikigami throughout his life, named Byakko, Daion, Genbu, Kijin, Kochin, Rikugo, Seiryu, Suzaku, Taijo, Tenko, Tenku, and Toda. While she is not an Onmyoji, it is rumored that Akiha Tono has an ability called Shikigami Operation. Details on how it works are unclear, but it is theorized that Akiha used this ability to save the life of her adopted brother, Shiki Nanaya, when they were children. If this is true, it implies Shiki might be some variation of Shikigami, with Akiha being his master. Let us not get too carried away by speculation. Earlier, I mentioned Onmyodo adopted the philosophy of yin and yang. In Chinese Buddhism, it is called the Taiji, and is visualized through the iconic image of 2 opposing forces. Not only is life balanced by opposite forces such as night and day, or good and evil, each of the two forces has a small part of the other inside itself. After all, we cannot live by abolishing one force in favor of the other. Rather, the key to proper living is finding balance between them as they exist harmoniously. This is important because invoking the duality of yin and yang helps mages construct elaborate spells. Our best example is the Honoden Rokuju Yonsho, the bounded fields surrounding Soren Araya's Ogawa apartment complex. The building's very architecture is based on the Taiji, and since Araya shares this same philosophy, he gains considerable influence over anything within the barrier. This includes being able to instantly teleport from part of the complex to another, even fusing through walls, as well as an ability to crush or condense the space within as he pleases. The way in which Araya uses the building to encapsulate a world on its own, combined with the supernatural properties of Shiki Ryogi, prove capable of bypassing the counterforce, giving him a direct path to the root. If only Shiki were in support of this endeavor. Instead, she fought and killed Soren Araya for trying to use her against her will. Interestingly, the nomenclature behind Ryogi ties Onmyodo directly to Taiji philosophy. It supposes that Taiji is the one, the beginning of the world, and the yin and yang that divide it are collectively known as Ryogi. In that regard, Soren Araya was almost literally trying to incorporate the concept of Ryogi into his model. It makes sense when you consider that the Ryogi family is known for their practice of instilling dual personalities into its members. In summation, we simply cannot underestimate the value of Asian Magecraft systems. For the ones covered today, they all spawned from ancient Chinese Taoism, giving us philosophy Magecraft, which is practiced by immortal sages called Xian, and the Taoist idea of Feng Shui gave rise to Onmyodo and the Shikigami. Asian Magecraft is exceptionally broad in scope, and due to the association's lack of contact, it appears mystifying even to Western mages. To fully understand it, we must dive deep into the rich history, culture, religion, and philosophies practiced in the Far East during the Age of Mystery. Taoism predominantly originates from China, so for our next lesson, I hope to speak more on Japan's unique Shinto beliefs and the Magecraft established upon them. In our previous lesson, I covered the thaumaturgical systems influenced by ancient Chinese Taoism, namely Philosophy Magecraft and Onmyodo. While these systems extend their reach throughout Asia, Japan specifically is known for introducing systems of its own. As such, I want to take a deeper dive into uniquely Japanese Magecraft, such as Houjutsu and Shugendou. Traditional Japanese Magecraft is, perhaps more than other styles, rooted in the Age of Gods. This is because of Shinto, the primary religion practiced in Japan alongside Buddhism. Shinto deities, or kami, serve as a unique take on the concept of gods, but are nonetheless divine spirits whose power can be utilized for casting spells. In the same way as other divine spirits, kami derive power from worship, and that worship, in turn, flows into Magecraft. Shintoism is a polytheistic religion with many iconic deities, as well as sore, or ancestral spirits, which are the spiritual kami of once living beings who have long since passed away. In general, the Shinto belief is that kami exist in everything, including weather and even the landscape. This concept is referred to as Yaoyorozu no Kami, or 8 million gods. While these kami are said to exist everywhere, Shinto priests focus their worship by enshrining kami in specific locations across Japan. As such, there is a strong regional factor involved with kami and their powers. There are a variety of ways Japanese mages can call upon the powers of kami. Most involve the kashiwade, or clapping gesture, made before offering prayers at a Shinto shrine or altar. Japan's gods love arts and entertainment, especially kagura, a type of ceremonial dance that often incorporates masks. In that same way, mages incorporate festivals, games, and other rites when visiting gods, either to offer blessing or to quell their rage. In addition, Japanese mages have imported ideas from philosophy magecraft, allowing them to essentially share their deities through the philosophy foundation. By now you should know that, with the end of the Age of Gods, mystery suffered a huge decline, effectively weakening Magecraft the world over. However, island nations such as Britain and Japan were able to preserve the Age of Gods more heartily by being isolated from outside influence. In Japan's case, this preservation came in the form of divine bodies, or the fully formed organs of kami. Think of them like magical catalysts, fragments of a god's power that remain even in the modern era. From the myriad of divine bodies that once existed in Japan, only 8 are known to still retain their former power, and the 8 groups that hold them implement a variety of methods to keep them safe. One of these groups is the Yako family in Tokyo. They are a distant relative of the Ryogi demon hunters, and they continue to practice traditional Japanese magecraft along with being a Yakuza faction. They possess the divine body of Okunishi, a god of the night and lord of the land of the dead. This particular kami is enshrined at Kanda Myojin in Akihabara, of all places. Originally, this god was known as Onamuchi before merging with other gods to become something akin to a high spirit. He was once a mortal man who worked alongside a wise dwarf to help build Japan, playing a role in Japan's creation myth. He became a god after enduring the afterlife of Ne no Kuni, but was ultimately killed when his brothers crushed him between 2 trees. His legend is considered a Japanese version of Set and Typhon, Greek gods whose stories were spread eastward by Iskandar's invasions. This just goes to show how all forms of magecraft are influenced by the sharing of information across the globe. Regardless, the Yako choose to preserve the divine body of Okunishi by storing it in their own descendants. The humans whose bodies protect it are referred to as the Black Chest. Specifically, the Yako family practices Houjutsu, a Japanese variant of the Xian arts discussed previously. Houjutsu is primarily used against demons, which makes sense when you consider that the Yako are connected to the Ryogi demon hunters. The spells that can be used through Houjutsu vary, but one type is the use of edict binding, which restrains non-human creatures. While helpful against pureblood demons, it has no effect on half-demon hybrids. The Demon Hunter organization, then, was formed in part to derive new methods of slaying demon hybrids. The mage Soren Araya also uses Houjutsu, specifically a spell called Kongyakshuk, to interfere with space. For Araya, this meant clenching his fist and chanting a single-word aria to completely crush a region of space with ease. Well, I say with ease, but there's no denying this is high-level magecraft that can only be used so effortlessly when truly mastered. Generally, Houjutsu is only practiced by those of a secretive organization in Japan. While no longer having anything to do with magecraft, monks at the Ryudo Temple in Fuyuki City used to be a part of this organization. A more dominating branch of Japanese magecraft is called Shugendou, which means the path of training and testing. It is a style that blends magecraft and religion, derived from Japanese folk beliefs influenced by Buddhism, Taoism, and Onmyodo. What sets it apart is its focus on the mountains, as Shugendou also refers to acquiring special powers through intense worship and training in the mountains. These powers are both diverse and obscure, such as learning the Hihatsuho, or flying bowl technique. With it, practitioners are able to move a small metal disc in the air without making any sound, and yet use it to strike with ferocity. A huge component of Shugendou is emulating the techniques of mountain-dwelling Tengu. The Tengu are a species of elementals, which are similar to nature spirits. They aren't gods, but they're certainly more godlike than human-like. Normally, they don't interact with humans, but there are notable exceptions, such as when Kichi Hogen, the Tengu of Mount Kurama, taught Ushiwakamaru in the ways of war. Because of the gifts Tengu occasionally bestow upon humans, Tengu have a number of worshippers who gather at Mount Izuna. Those able to endure Tengu training emerge with unique abilities, such as the Tengu flight technique, which has mages leaping unnaturally high in the air. They do so with enough speed that they might as well be teleporting. On a more extreme level, mages can learn to harness Tengu Fire, a flame spell which is effective even against opponents who are otherwise immune to flames. Training in Shugendou is often intensive and dehumanizing. Such is the case for Jirobo Seigin Tokito. Jirobo's father was gifted many sons from different mothers. Knowing only one of these sons could inherit his magic crest, the father raised his children in the mountains, training them tirelessly to compete for the top spot. From their birth, these brothers were destined to seek their father's approval and see each other as rivals. Jirobo himself cared not for the family crest, and was thus complacent when his elder brother was chosen as heir. He skipped out on the inheritance ceremony, whereas his other brothers retaliated. They attacked their elder brother, inciting their father to massacre them all. After the ensuing conflict, the elder brother emerged as the only survivor, but he too was nearly burnt to death by Tengu fire. In a desperate attempt to protect his family crest, he called out to Jirobo. After walking past the corpses of his father and brethren, Jirobo reluctantly inherited the crest in its damaged state. It was a cruel and inefficient practice, yet I have to admit that sort of thing is common in the world of mages. In a very similar manner, we have the Myorenji family of mages, who practice an especially deadly form of Shugendou, Tengu arts. Viewing the Tengu as hellish beings, the Myorenji train in the Tengu arts by corrupting themselves. In doing so, they hope to acquire one of the Rokujinsu, or 6 supernatural powers of Buddhism. These techniques are typically only accessible after 100 years of a mage training to enhance their bodies, and yet the Myorenji family had a prodigy on their hands. Their star pupil, Aro Myorenji, was able to master 3 of the Rokujinsu by the age of 10. Of those 3, he learned Jinsokotsu, the ability to run at superhuman speed, Tashinsu, the ability to read his opponent's minds as colored auras, and Rojinsu, an enlightened understanding of his own destiny and lifespan. In another sense, Rojinsu gives him the ability to end his own cycle of reincarnation. When combined, these techniques produce amazing effects. For example, he can incorporate Tashinsu with Rojinsu to sever reincarnation not just on himself, but also on an opponent like Ashia Doman, permanently preventing the Onmyoji from resurrecting, rendering his Shikigami clones ineffective. Ultimately, however, Aro Myorenji did not use these arts for the sake of his family. Rather, he hated the family practice of kidnapping children and forcing them into a life of training. The Myorenji did this often, and would abandon students who couldn't keep up. These children were almost always left to die in the wilderness. Wanting to put an end to this vicious cycle, Aro used his techniques to slaughter the entire family before descending the mountain and renaming himself Scandinavia Peperoncino. Mages often want to deny their humanity, and yet that humanity is often what ultimately guides them. The life of a mage is often full of suffering, but I don't personally believe that has to be the case. In summation, from the broader scope of Asian magecraft, Japan has a unique set of styles that can be found nowhere else in the world. Much of this is tied to the Shinto religion of enshrining and worshipping kami. As an island nation, Japan has better preserved its mystery after the end of the Age of Gods. They benefit from channeling a kami's power through prayer and ritual, which can be as bland or festive as any given kami prefers. One of the applications of this power is known as Houjutsu, but it's seldom practiced in the open. On the more Buddhist side of Japan's religious practices, there is Shugendou, a style of mountain training that heavily relies on the use of Tengu arts. Now, in this lesson alone, I've already mentioned both divine spirits, such as kami, and nature spirits in relation to Tengu. As it turns out, the term spirit is used in a more broad context as well. Thus, for our next lesson, I wish to cover all the varied meanings behind the term spirit. In our previous lesson, I covered Japanese thaumaturgical systems, such as Houjutsu and Shugendou. These practices can often be described as spiritual, which begs the question, what exactly is a spirit? It's a broad term, referring to heroic spirits, nature spirits, and other ghost-like apparitions. For the sake of clarity, I would like to take this opportunity to differentiate all the different meanings mages have for the term spirit. Generally speaking, a spirit refers to a spiritual body, an immaterial form that can only be perceived by humans with a unique affinity for it. Most spirits are considered extensions of the planet, used as its sense of touch. The more powerful spirits gain an ability to present themselves in a tangible form. Without a material form, science is unable to intervene with the spiritual body, giving Magecraft an advantage even in the modern era. This matches all the tropes you might expect. Spirits disregard the limitations of our physical world, allowing for phenomena such as phasing through walls, floating, and invisibility. It's fitting because, for as much as our planet uses them, spirits are a product of human worship and folklore. Our belief in the supernatural gives credibility to the existence of spirits. The more glaring example is, of course, divine spirits or gods. They are directly born from our human worship and count as spiritual beings even when they can be seen by and interact directly with humanity. In a simple sense, one could call the other spirits lesser gods, given how they all thrive on the concept of mystery. Even in the age of man, where science and technology reign supreme, there is a gap in our knowledge of the world that allows for the possibility of spirits, even if the majority of humans today do not believe in ghosts. In other words, we lack the ability to scientifically prove spirits don't exist, even though we can explain much more about our world than we could before. Another powerful spirit we've covered in these lessons is, of course, the heroic spirit. In order to protect humanity from their destruction at the hands of beasts, the planet records heroic legends into the throne of heroes. By merging these legends with spiritual bodies called saintcrafts, the planet can summon forth heroes of the past as warriors to do its bidding. As one of the stronger types of spirits, heroic spirits can both enter and exit their spirit forms. In spirit form, servants are able to hide their presence, but it also limits their ability to interact with the material world. Thus, they typically fight in a material form, leaving them vulnerable to physical damage. Should a servant's spiritual core get destroyed, they will vanish until being summoned again at a later time. It's worth noting that, even in physical form, heroic spirits are beings composed of mana, and without a steady supply of it, they are forced to return to their spirit form, and at worst, vanish back to the throne of heroes. Their bodies may look humanoid, but unlike actual humans, heroic spirits do not age. They lack the need to eat, and rather than taking in a mage's seed for reproduction, a servant will merely absorb that seed as a store of mana. Normally, this mana is provided by the planet, assuming the heroic spirit is a counter-guardian pledged to protect humanity. When mages summon servants as familiars, they need to provide that mana on their own. The most powerful spirits in the world are referred to as elementals. These are the beings the planet uses as its sense of touch. Most frequently, when one refers to an elemental, they are also referring to a nature spirit. They may not be gods, but their existence is extremely similar. The biggest difference is that, while gods lose their power in the absence of human worship, the planet can maintain an elemental's strength long after humans give form to them. Many Faeries are a type of elemental, such as Morgan Le Fay and Vivian. In Arthurian legend, Faeries were responsible for creating the divine constructs Excalibur and Rungo-Minyad. Celtic mythology also speaks of fairies, such as the fairy kings who raised Diarmid, or the fairy who stole 7 years of youth from Finn McCool. Cuchulainn even had an affair with Fan, the fairy wife of Manannán mac Lir. While common fairies seem to have vanished along with the Age of Gods, many still exist in a form that is imperceptible to humans. Some mages have mystic eyes, such as Glam Sight, that let them interact with fairies even in the modern era. I could spend an entire lesson on fairies alone, so for our purposes here, I will settle the matter now. Another elemental is Logue Beowulf, a phantasmal being that manifested near a village of werewolves. Latching on to werewolf folklore, Beowulf took on the form of a golden werewolf, which the village recognized as a rare breed only previously seen in their oldest ancestor. These people hoped Beowulf would help them revive their species, only to discover that, as a nature spirit, Beo isn't a real werewolf. Instead, Beo lacks a defined gender and does not age. Unable to mate with Beo, the villagers sold him off to Toko Aozaki, who raised him as a familiar of sorts. V is an elemental contracted with the Romanov dynasty in Russia. Its mystic eyes are valuable for being able to detect enemy weaknesses, particularly in fortresses and bounded fields. When utilized to aid Anastasia, V's eyes are capable of creating weak points where none existed previously. While some debate whether V is a fairy or not, we can safely say it is, at its core, a nature spirit. The Tengu we discussed in our most recent lessons also qualify as elementals associated with mountain ranges in Japan. While Tengu occasionally impart their wisdom to humans, they can just as easily open the gates of hell to condemn humans who upset them. Yume Ren is considered an incarnated elemental, a nature spirit who is reborn into a powerful, practically immortal body. She shares many attributes with what is often considered to be the strongest elemental, the True Ancestor. True Ancestors, as we've already covered in depth, are nature spirits born from an alliance between Earth and Brunstad of the Crimson Moon. Their original purpose was to police and protect the Earth from humanity's encroaching technology. They maintained the delicate balance between the purity of nature and the fact that humans are technically part of nature. True Ancestors could enforce this through the use of Marble Phantasm, an ability to shape the world to their whim. Regrettably, these same immortal beings were plagued by a psychological thirst for human blood. This corrupted them, leaving their princess, Arcoade, to remain as the only surviving ancestor. In all of these prior examples, elementals are strong enough that they manifest in material bodies. Even if they should die in a conventional sense, however, they still maintain their bond with the planet. It's also worth noting that nature spirits can literally be born from the earth itself as the result of natural phenomena. Spirits can emerge from soil, ores, gemstones, and jewels. Sometimes natural disasters can give rise to spirits, such as Koyanskaya, who is an incarnation of the Tunguska event, a mysterious explosion in Russia during June of 1908. Jinn are another category of spirits that include the Queen of Sheba's familiars, Solomon's demon gods, and even parts of the Zabaniya used by Hassani Saba. Sometimes, spirits can emerge from dead animals. Unlike human souls, which lack a material form when released from their bodies, animal souls maintain the form they had in life. Just like heroic spirits, animal spirits can feed on the energy of other mortal creatures, and they can also possess both people and objects. The bronze link manipulators used by Fiore for Vegeta Millennia actually function due to being possessed by 4 dog spirits. Similarly, there are the Kitsune and Inukami, uniquely Japanese spirits capable of possessing humans and driving them to madness. By combining an animal spirit with the soul of a human, mages can create what are called guardian spirits. This allows animal spirits to gain a sense of human intelligence, but in order to maintain their form, they must be bound to a magical object or location. Nanako is an excellent example. She is the result of merging the spirit of a unicorn with that of a young girl. She is tethered to the 7th Holy Scripture, one of the Church's most valuable weapons. Those are all the powerful spirits worth noting. More conventionally, when the general public imagines spirits, they think of ghosts and apparitions, which are both genuine things as well. Let's start with ghosts, also called wraiths. When humans die, their souls are supposed to return to the swirl of the root. Sometimes, however, these souls will carry excess baggage from life, such as regrets or past grudges, and that leads them to haunt places, items, or even other people. Typically, wraiths cannot interfere with the physical world, and they only do so through possessing a medium. For instance, a wraith might possess a corpse in order to attack someone. Existing as a wraith is not an ideal form of living, if you can even call it that. Without the true magic of Heaven's Feel, souls separated from their bodies are destined to decay. This can be seen physically with Zoken Mato, who has been preserving his soul through crestworms that feed on the life energy of humans. The longer this goes on, the less of himself he is able to maintain, such that his original hopes for the Grail have long since been lost. It is said that the world's very first wraith is the dead apostle Stanrobe Kalhin, who, after being vanquished by the Church, continues to thrive as a ghost. Next, we have apparitions, which are what you get when a person's strong thoughts are left behind after their soul departs this world. Typically, these thoughts are primitive, existing as an instinctive drive or impulse. Those with spiritual affinity can see them, but by and large, they don't pose much threat. That said, if caught in a state of mental weakness, people can find themselves influenced by apparitions. Such was the case for the spirits inhabiting the Fujo building in Mifune City. After suffering from a terminal illness for over 10 years, Kyrie Fujo developed a temptation for suicide. When given a spiritual body with which to escape the confines of her hospital, she tried to reach out to others, instilling that suicidal urge into vulnerable teenage girls who would subsequently fall to their deaths from the Fujo building's roof. Lacking mental conviction, these girls died, and their lingering thoughts gathered in the sky, luring in even more victims. Misaya Oji is known as a fairy user, which is misleading because, technically, one cannot create fairies through Magecraft. This means that the fairy-like familiars that surround her are merely apparitions, lacking the same strength an actual fairy would possess. Lastly, due to the nature of death and regret, many spirits happen to be evil, fueled by their negative feelings. The evil priest Kuko Chihiko once attacked the ancient land of Yamatai, and now exists as a spirit with an ominous skeletal appearance. Jack the Ripper is a being composed of smaller evil spirits, the lingering pleas of unborn children aborted by prostitutes in London's Whitechapel district. It may seem odd to consider children evil, but they happen to manifest as a serial killer who murders women in an attempt to return to the womb. Minamoto no Raiko's divine half, Ushi Gozen, is characterized as an evil, cursed spirit. While these evil spirits are typically a threat, some mages have been able to use them as a valuable tool. Kenneth L. Malloy Archibald, for instance, was able to incorporate evil spirits to serve as guard dogs in his atelier. The young mage Eris Utsumi is inhabited by evil spirits known as dread spirits. She uses these dark forces to fight and defeat her enemies, but when they aren't satisfied by her performance, they resort to opening up wounds across her body, tormenting her painfully. Perhaps the only saving grace to these evil spirits is that they happen to be vulnerable to exorcisms, giving mages from the Holy Church a distinct advantage. In summation, spirits are a type of being in our world that exist as a result of human belief and are often utilized by the planet as a way of feeling and interacting with its inhabitants. They possess spiritual bodies, which are immaterial and defy the laws of physics, but more powerful spirits are able to incarnate in physical forms. Such powerful spirits include heroic spirits, divine spirits, nature spirits, and elementals. The more ghostly spirits you may have heard of are actually lesser spirits, such as wraiths and apparitions. Mages have found ways of using spirits to their own advantage, but sometimes we are better off letting the church eliminate them outright. For our next lesson, I wish to shift focus. Mentioning Eris Utsumi, she came from a unique birth that has me wanting to discuss mage fertility. Thus, I aim to cover how mages approach courtship, reproduction, and familial relations. In our previous lesson, I covered the various meanings behind the term spirit, including fairies, elementals, and servants. That led me to bringing up the mage Eris Utsumi, whose body is inhabited by dread spirits. Her own birth is unique enough that I'd like to broadly cover the idea of mage fertility. We know mages strive to pass on their legacy to their next of kin, but circumstances make that process ever more complex. Thus, for today's lesson, I will speak of mage pedigree. Put bluntly, the potential of any given mage is determined by the number and quality of their magic circuits. While there are convoluted means of compensating for them artificially, a person's magic circuits are obtained at birth, and mages cannot simply gain more circuits through effort. As a general rule, the quality of mage circuits is inherited from parent to child, so the stronger the lineage, the stronger the resulting magic circuits. That said, such a result is never guaranteed, and a variety of factors influence the strength of a mage's bloodline, including their homeland and choice of spouse. Just like ordinary genetics, there is an element of random mutation, allowing for some families to suddenly drop off the map, while others spring up with no prior history. As a result, mage families are often very particular about who they associate with, doing whatever they can to maximize the odds of producing a prolific heir. This involves arranged marriages between already successful families, and to establish these relationships, strong mage families develop smaller branch families. A decent example is the Animasphere family, who has expanded its teachings to the Fellows and Fargo families, among others. The same can be said for the Archisorts, a branch family of the Elmaloi. By keeping familial ties close, it is thought that proper mages can be effectively bred to preserve their unique features. Despite these efforts, it's never certain that a given family will maintain its prominence, nor will weaker families be forever destined to mediocrity. The Aozaki family, for instance, nearly perished over a mere 6 generations. They weren't especially reputable to begin with, and when its previous heir was born with little to no circuits, there was little hope for the future. Miraculously, however, the next generation of Aozaki mages turned that downhill spiral upside down. Toko Aozaki was born a prodigy with 20 magic circuits, and Aoko was born with obscure circuits that rotate to increase their efficiency. This implies that genetic factors can lay dormant in a family, only becoming active for specific generations. It also means that families that were thought to have died out, or were never considered mages at all, could suddenly develop quality circuits from parents with no potential themselves. If not for this phenomenon, new mage families would never emerge. For instance, was Shiro Emiya's affinity for magecraft just a lucky break, or did his ancestry dabble in magecraft years prior? Mages that understand this can, potentially, manipulate it to their benefit. Such is the case for Misala Escardos, an ancient mage who intentionally deprived his lineage of a proper heir for over 1,000 years. In order to mask his intentions and prevent his children from greedily rushing the process, he adjusted the bloodline such that, with every passing generation, the family would lose its power and forget its purpose. While the family did keep itself afloat, they did so as a useless husk. Their magic crest, while maintained throughout the years, could no longer be read or understood. When the conditions were right, however, a young boy named Flat Escardos was born to finally carry on the family legacy. He could interpret the ancient crest that not even his forebearers could, resulting in him being the strongest heir the family had ever seen. For 1,800 years, the Escardos were mocked by the association, but now they had an amazing prodigy capable of blending past spells to create new ones. Another important factor in determining a mage's bloodline is their territory. Mages who base their craft on the rich heritage of their land benefit from staying in one place. Should they leave, or are otherwise forced out, they risk their legacy dying out. Such is the case for the Isekol family, currently headed by Selenik Isekol Yigidamilenia. Her family dates back as far as the witch hunts of the Middle Ages, during which her ancestors were forced to flee from Western Europe to Siberia. Without their original land to serve as the foundation, the family's bloodline declined. This gave Selenik the idea to volunteer her family to assimilate with the larger Yigidamilenia clan. A similar tragedy befell the Mato clan. Once known as the Makiri, the Matos left their homeland to settle into Japan. For the past 200 years, their legacy fell apart, culminating in the failure that is Shinji Mato. Neither he nor his father had any magic circuits whatsoever. The very last vestiges of the family died off with Shinji's uncle Karia. To revive their family, the elder Zoken called in a favor from his lasting partnership with the Tosakas, adopting Sakura Tosaka to take Shinji's place as the Mato heir. It was far from ideal, because it made inheriting the Mato crest much more dangerous. As you know, magic crests are similar to organs, in the way that, if transplanted into a foreign host, they might be rejected by that host's body. We've seen this in the tragic case of Kairi Shishigo. Thanks to a curse incurred by his ancestors, Kairi was born infertile, unable to have a biological offspring. He was encouraged to adopt a daughter, but because she wasn't related by blood, attempting to transfer his magic crest to her caused her to die during the procedure. With results like that, it's a miracle Sakura was able to inherit the Mato crest at all. Her survival can likely be attributed to her amazing potential as a mage, as well as the bizarre nature of the Mato crest. Rather than a stigmata carved into a single part of the body, the Mato crest takes the form of various worms that infest the body and feed off its host like parasites. It took 11 years for Sakura to acclimate to the crestworms, and even with that, it would only take half a day for the worms to devour her if left unchecked. Needless to say, it is not very efficient. The case of Rin and Sakura Tosaka has me wanting to discuss the concept of mage courtship. If simply being away from their homeland can cause magic circuits to break down across generations, then surely a mage's choice of mate can play a huge factor in the resulting heir. Sakura's father, Tokiomi Tosaka, took a practical approach, selecting his bride based on her ability rather than his own passion. His wife, Aoi Tosaka, was a daughter of the Zenjo family of mages. While she had no magic circuits of her own, a magical factor in her bloodline made her and her ancestors ideal for birthing gifted mages. As such, she gave Tokiomi not one, but two powerful daughters, more than the couple ever needed. Whenever this happens, it is typical for the stronger of the two children to step up as heir, allowing the other child to live a normal life. This is because the family crest can only be passed on to a single heir. If not for the motto's need for an adopted pupil, Sakura would never have been raised as a mage. It makes sense that the passing of a crest is a critical issue for mage families. Going back to the Awazaki family, controversy stirred when the younger daughter, Aoko, was given the crest despite her sister Toko's superiority. This decision had both daughters fighting to kill each other. Even without a crest, Toko is one of the most talented mages out there. It's eerie to imagine just how powerful she would be with the Awazaki crest to add to her repertoire. Naturally, when it comes to prestige, mages without a crest are considered inferior. Such was the case for Solau Nuada-Rei Sofitia-Ri. Her brother Bram inherited their family crest, but when he did not succeed as a mage, Solau was arranged to marry Kenneth Elmaloy Archibald to restore their family's standing in the clock tower. Her only value as a mage was seen in whatever future child she would bear for Kenneth. Her blood was more valuable than her individual achievements. Perhaps because of this, Solau only reluctantly complies with the arrangement. She shows Kenneth nothing but disdain and loathing, especially for his cowardly tactics in the Fourth Holy Grail War. On the opposite side, however, it appears that Kenneth truly loves Solau. This can be seen in how Kenneth put his arrogance aside for her, risking everything he had in order to save her life. In that regard, it is definitely possible for mages to genuinely love one another. The only catch is that this love must come second to a mage's responsibility to pass on the family legacy. While we're still on the topic of magic crests, I want to note that while mages typically only pass their crest down to a single child, there are exceptions. One such exception is seen with the Edelfelt family, which has a magical attribute called sisters. Because of it, daughters of the Edelfelt family are born as twins, and they are both capable of inheriting the family crest simultaneously. For instance, a pair of Edelfelt sisters underwent this procedure before participating in the Third Holy Grail War. Despite this ability, the family's current heir, Luvia Gelita, has chosen to take on the crest by herself so that her twin sister can stay safe in Finland. Thus far, we've established the importance of a mage's parents regarding the birth of quality magic circuits. That said, you might be surprised to learn just how significant this can be. Finally, we can mention Eris Utsumi, the only ever recorded case of a human being born from a heroic spirit. Specifically, Eris's father was a human who had a child with his servant Izanami, one of Japan's gods who created the land by churning the ocean with her spear, Ame no Nuboko. This goddess of the underworld was summoned as a divine servant, making love with Eris's father to birth a special child in Mosaic City. As a result, Eris is not your typical mage. She's considered a quasi-servant who fights other servants with her poisonous black blood, composed of dread spirits the Throne of Heroes rejected. This makes her suitable of the name Grim Reaper, a fighter who wields the Ame no Sakahoko, a replica of her mother's spear, to hunt down renegade servants. This likely has you wondering, how is it possible for a heroic spirit to give birth? While little investigation has been done, the leading theory is that when a spirit possesses a mortal vessel, it becomes possible for that vessel to carry the pregnancy. Given that Izanami is a divine spirit, she would have needed a human host to manifest as a pseudo-servant. This implies it might be possible for other pseudo-servants to reproduce, and if so, rituals like the Holy Grail War could be used by mages to find potential mates, imbuing their children with divine powers. At the same time, it's also possible that this phenomena is unique to the servants of Mosaic City and its mysterious existence. Still, this wouldn't be the first time a human has been imbued from birth with divine traits. Artoria Pendragon, King Arthur of Britain, was born through a process called conceptual fertilization. Using his magecraft, Merlin was able to imbue the child of Uther Pendragon and Lady Igraine with the concept of the Red Dragon, a prophesized symbol of Britain's triumph over the invading Saxons. This was similar to how mages carefully select their spouses to achieve the best result. Blue-eyed Igraine was the most compatible with the ritual. As a result, Artoria was born with a unique heart and magic circuits far superior to any ordinary humans. Her draconic circuits are instead referred to as a magic core, granting her resistance to most forms of magecraft. For the vast majority of mages who strive to one day reach the root, it is assumed that their goals cannot be achieved in a single lifetime. Instead, they hope their legacy will eventually succeed, giving meaning to their life's work. That is why a mage's children are so important, and why mages go to such lengths to try and produce prolific heirs. Whether it be their own child or an apprentice, mages are invested in their future, putting their own satisfaction aside for a long-term goal. Protecting one's pupils is a natural instinct, but not necessarily when an ego gets involved. Short-sighted mages sometimes wish to experience glory in their own lifetime, and the thought of giving that glory to their children, or their children's children, is unbearable. This can result in a mage despising their own pupils, becoming envious while dreading their obsolescence. We can observe this with the father of Kirstaria Wodim. The Wodim family is one of the oldest mage families around, pristinely preserving their magic crest for thousands of years. Hoping to carry on this legacy, Kirstaria's father was devastated to learn that, because of Kirstaria's tremendous talent, the family crest would go straight to him, skipping an entire generation. Jealous, Kirstaria's father lashed out, attempting to have him assassinated, endangering the family's 1,000-year-old legacy for one person's selfishness. To err is human, I suppose, and despite what they might tell you otherwise, mages are human. In summation, mage ability is mainly determined from birth. Older, more prestigious families can expect to rear even stronger children, but various factors, such as genetic mutations and the lay of the land, can render even the greatest family obsolete. To prevent this, mages do whatever they can to prepare for the next generation, carefully selecting their sexual partners to ensure the best offspring possible. Even love and romance take a back seat to a mage's legacy, leading to all manner of familial turmoil. It sparks envy, sibling rivalries, political marriages, turf wars, and elaborate rituals, all in the name of a far-off dream to reach the root. It is an exercise in trying to manipulate a system we have little control of, making us question whether it's truly worth the effort. On a similar note, I plan to cover another aspect of magecraft that is highly genetic. For our next lesson, I will discuss psychic powers and ESP. In our previous lesson, I covered Mage Pedigree, the process whereby mages pass their abilities on to later generations. While mage families can try to maximize the potency of their children, the quality and number of magic circuits a child is born with can still fluctuate. In other words, one's potential as a mage is a genetic anomaly. It can be passed on, but it's not guaranteed. For today's lesson, I want to cover a similar concept. Like all creatures, humans are born with mutations, some helpful and others detrimental, such as the nature of evolution. Some mutations affect the brain, causing it to perceive the world in a unique way. People with such a condition are referred to as psychics, and their abnormal abilities are called extrasensory perception, or ESP. By and large, psychic abilities are a type of mystery, just like magecraft. Rather than controlling mana, psychics are able to see and understand aspects of the world that fall outside of common sense. This allows them to manipulate reality in a similar manner to magecraft, but while the results may look the same, such abilities arise from different sources. Unlike magecraft, which can be taught to anyone with magic circuits, psychic abilities are innate. Psychics can learn to harness and control their abilities, but they can only do so with a baseline talent to build off from. This innate talent is acquired in one of two ways. As I mentioned earlier, ESP is a mutation in the brain. On a genetic level, this means children can inherit those mutated genes from their parents. Think of this as a factor for potential or compatibility. Fujino Asagami, for instance, inherited her family's telekinetic abilities. This created a unique dilemma, as her father, head of the Asagami demon hunters, did not want her to have ESP, deeming it unnecessary in modern society. He deemed her an unfit existence and tried to suppress her powers through medication. Additionally, some psychics acquire their abilities through some sort of alteration or injury to the brain. This process is not genetic and therefore cannot be passed on. This can be seen with the mystic eyes of death perception acquired by both Shiki Nanaya and Shiki Ryogi after each of them incurred near fatal injuries. They initially struggled with this new power, unable to suppress the lines of death permeating from every corner of their vision. In Nanaya's case, he was given a special pair of glasses, the Mystic Eye Killers, allowing him to choose when to activate his eyes. As for Shiki Ryogi, she was able to take control of her powers through coaching from Toko Aozaki. It's worth noting that the strongest forms of ESP arise from a combination of these two methods. After all, not everyone who suffers brain damage is gifted with psychic abilities. Rather, the Shikis had an existing affinity they inherited from their demon hunter families. Going back to Fujino Asagami, her innate telekinesis became amplified by a strike to her spine, giving her mystic eyes of distortion. Her ability to bend and dismember matter was the product of a genetic predisposition and a traumatic injury. Since this is both rare and random, one cannot hope to acquire mystic eyes in this fashion. They are not typical eyes which can be extracted and traded, since their value comes more from the user's own brain. While it is of no practical merit, some people consider ESP to be proof of humanity's collective unconscious. Alaya, the planet's will to protect humanity, marks humans as both part of and separate from nature. In that regard, a psychic is the most unnatural of humans. This made psychics ideal for hunting down monsters. I already have a previous lesson dedicated to the Demon Hunter organization, but for now, realize that demon hunting families are the primary users of ESP, taking great effort to cultivate and pass down their talents. The Ryogi family has an innate talent that they use to develop dual personalities. It is their effort to master 2 skills at a time, which they believe is impossible with a single persona. Theirs is a risky endeavor, as some members of the family either fail to develop that second personality or they find themselves unable to regulate their 2 halves. In the worst-case scenario, Ryogi heirs become murderous beasts. The Nanaya family cultivated a psychic ability of pure eyes through incest. Members would be able to perceive spiritual forces, as well as see intentions and emotions through color. In Shiki's case, he was even able to view his sister Akiha's demonic origami hair. The Fujo family has an affinity for synchronization, a psychic ability to transfer energy through the exchange of bodily fluids. The young maids Hisui and Kohaku were coveted for this ability, taken in by the Tono family to suppress the demonic impulses of Makihisa and Akiha Tono. The Fujo's heir, Kirie, has a psychic ability that lets her perceive spirits, though it results in her being blind to the physical world. The Asagami family and their telekinetic abilities trace back to the larger Asakami family, who once used ESP as shrine maidens to communicate with gods. Demon hunters are far from the only psychics. Clairvoyance and precognition are a form of psychic ability that pertains to retaining more information than necessary. As human society became more elaborate, we began disregarding excess stimuli in order to survive. Those who still have that memory retention can more intuitively understand their surroundings, as well as predict future events based on observed trends. This allows an otherwise ordinary girl like Shizune Seo to accurately predict the future at random. Others, like Mitsuru Kamekura, are able to calculate the future by first imagining a desired future and evaluating what it would take to realize that future. While it may not be fair to bring up, given that he's a machine, it's interesting to note that Xiang Yu's swift processing capabilities amount in the same result as precognition. Through telepathic connections, it is also possible for psychics to perceive the past through accumulating memories. Arguably less helpful would be the masochistic spiritualist constitution possessed by Karen Hortensia. It is an extremely bizarre psychic condition whereby Karen's body mimics the effects of people who are possessed by demons. It is masochistic because her suffering can be used to detect the presence of demons. Born to the unremarkable Kokuto family, Asaka Kokuto has a psychic disposition toward pyrokinesis. More specifically, she can cause spontaneous combustion, invoking it like a spell, even though she lacks magic circuits. It is powerful enough that Asaka becomes the apprentice of Toko Aozaki in order to control her ability. In that endeavor, she utilizes a mystic code called the Salamander Skin Gloves, which amplify her ability. When she combusts a target, she doesn't rely on Magecraft, but rather a combination of scientific theories. First, there is charged corpus theory, which posits that the human body produces electricity based on psychological activity. Then there is electromagnetism, which attributes spontaneous combustion to the release of electrons in the atmosphere. In Asuka's case, she is able to create an electric current in her mind that stimulates the electrons around her. Thanks to Toko's instruction, Asuka has learned to channel her pyrokinesis through music, chanting notes as an incantation. One final example I would like to give deals with dead apostles. These vampiric creatures, when they consume the blood of others, turn their victims into ghouls to serve them. At the lowest levels, said ghouls are mindless, completely dominated by their bloodlust. Some dead apostles, however, have the mental disposition to rise the ranks, and even rival their master to become vampires all their own. Satsuki Yumizuka, an otherwise normal girl, possesses a psychic disposition that makes her well-suited to vampirism. When her blood is sucked, she immediately becomes an independent vampire, untethered to her parent. It is said that only 30 or so humans in the entire world have this psychic ability. In summation, psychic abilities, or ESP, appear and function like Magecraft, but originate from unique brain mutations and traumas, rather than the inheritance of magic circuits. This generally means that psychic abilities are not passed on from one generation to the next, with the exception of demon-hunting families that intentionally cultivated their genetic affinity for it. ESP takes many forms, from the conventional ability to move objects with one's mind to the more abstract perception of spirits or demons. In either case, a psychic's brain has an extra channel of worldly perception that ordinary humans lack. This can be extremely useful or detrimental, given that psychic abilities are innate, and one cannot simply choose not to learn them. Instead, the best a psychic can do is learn to manage and harness their unique powers. Given that mages strive to study mystery, knowledge of ESP can be just as valuable as learning new spells. The way that Magecraft interacts with the human body is fascinating. Thus, for our next lesson, I aim to discuss various magical procedures. Most prominently, the spiritual healing practiced by Kirei Kotomine. In our previous lesson, I covered psychic abilities, also called ESP. It is an ability that stems from a unique channel in the brain, which makes me want to discuss the relationship between Magecraft and the human body. Specifically, I wish to focus on healing Magecraft and the various ways that mages can restore their vitality. Depending on the method, mages are able to repair their damaged bodies, gain immortality, and even overcome death itself. Generally speaking, however, resurrection is not an option for modern mages. Without the power of true magic, the current domain of healing Magecraft extends to recovering flesh wounds and detoxifying one's body. Given Magecraft's obvious occupational hazards, there are a great many mages who train in healing spells. The success of this healing depends on the aptitude of both the healer and the injured victim, meaning that it can be difficult to heal mages who lack potential. For example, when Waver Velvet was struck by lightning from Hephaestion's noble phantasm, it took the combined effort of Cowless Forvege and Olga Marie Animisvere to keep him alive. The Einsburns are adept at healing spells, but they typically use them not to save and protect others, but rather to relieve the burden from when their homunculi are modified into vessels for the Holy Grail. Even with the aid of Magecraft, this process seems horrifically painful. Irisveil von Einsburn is capable of healing in a more conventional manner, making her a valuable partner for Saber during the Fourth Holy Grail War. When summoned as a heroic spirit in her dress of heaven, Irie's healing becomes even stronger. Her noble phantasm, Song of Grail, O White Grail, Sing Out, uses her very nature to restore herself and her allies. At its best, this noble phantasm can revive fallen servants, so long as their spiritual cores remain intact. The sublimation of one's legend can often result in unique healing spells. Florence Nightingale, for instance, spent her life treating the wounded with traditional, albeit old-fashioned medicine and surgical procedures. As a servant, her healing takes on a more majestic form with the skill Nurse of Steel. This extends to her noble phantasm, Nightingale Pledge. I will abstain from whatever is deleterious and mischievous, an ability which both attacks her enemies, while also curing her allies of their poisons and other ailments. In life, the Oni known as Kijo Koyo from the Momiji Gari was given an incantation from Izuna Gongen called the Thread of Life. It is capable of driving away sickness while ensuring a long lifespan. As a well-studied witch, her healing magecraft can be invoked even when she's summoned as a berserker-class servant. Typically, however, modern mages rely on acquired spells to heal their wounds. Kenneth L. Malloy Archibald and Gord Music Yiga the Millennia both use conventional healing magecraft on their servants during their respective Grail Wars. Even less talented mages, such as Ritsuka Fujimaru, can invoke healing spells with the help of a well-made mystic code. Its effect can be enhanced with the added mana from a mage's command spells. Healing can also be accomplished through invoking runes. Bazette Fraga McRemitz uses runes to recover from mortal wounds. They can activate in the event that her heart stops, functioning as a resurrection spell on par with the Noble Phantasm's strength. The Celtic heroes Skahak and Cuchulainn both use rune magecraft to heal themselves. Skahak heals after launching her Gay Bolg alternative in order to mitigate the strain it puts on her body. Ku, on the other hand, prefers to cast his magic while hurling his spear. One of the more impressive feats of healing comes from Rin Tosaka. When Shiro Emiya's heart is pierced and mortally cursed by the Gay Bolg, Rin is able to save his life by not just healing his heart, but rather reconstructing it entirely. Admittedly, this is not a feat that Rin can accomplish anytime she wants. It was only possible by spending the stored mana in her family's most treasured jewel pendant. It took a full 10 years' worth of her collected energy to reverse one critical injury. Given she had no help from true magic, this feat is impressive enough to instantly earn her a spot at the clock tower. For as much as the Holy Church rivals the Mages Association, we mustn't forget that holy sacraments are, in fact, applications of magecraft. In that regard, it's no surprise for figures of the church to practice healing as well as any other mage. Kirei Kotomine, for example, was born with magic circuits through a church ritual honoring his father's many years of pious worship. He studied magecraft under his pupil Tokiomi Tosaka, learning alchemy, summoning, divination, necromancy, and even spiritual evocation, but never found success in any of these. Instead, Kirei had an aptitude for spiritual healing, and in just 3 years, he became so skilled in it that he surpassed Tokiomi. This makes Kirei a spiritual doctor, one who heals the body by going through the soul. This allows him to heal injuries and perform surgical procedures without making incisions. As an overseer for the Holy Grail, he is able to easily remove and transplant command spells from one master to another, a process which normally involves the loss of a limb and its nerve tissue. It is still painful, however, and patients have described it as having Kirei's fingers reach straight into their body. Still, that pain is a small price to pay, given the alternative. When Sakura Mato is ailed by an aphrodisiac poison that causes the crestworms in her body to squirm out of control, Kirei is able to calm her body and mind, restoring her lost mana. This consumes most of the command spells he'd been hoarding since the previous Grail War, and even with them, it's only enough to buy Sakura a small window of time before the worms get excited again. Kirei is certainly capable of removing the crestworms, but after a decade of them violating Sakura, many have metabolized with her heart and nervous system. Therefore, removing these crestworms would also kill her. This means that even spiritual healing has its limits. The idea of merging two different spiritual bodies should be impossible for him, but there is one case where it actually worked. When Shiro Emiya loses his arm to the shadow, heroic spirit Emiya opts to sever his own arm as a replacement. Kirei attaches this heroic spirit's arm to Shiro in an otherwise fruitless procedure. However, because Shiro and heroic spirit Emiya are the same person, there's just enough compatibility between the host and donor for the transplant to accept. The nun Yuika Suse is another member of the church who can heal. Her specialty is surgery, using the 8th Holy Sacrament to dull her patients with stigmata. This, in combination with the Aozaki family's natural healing abilities, allows Yuika to repair Aoko after being ravaged and mutilated by Lug Beowulf. This is roughly the extent to which humans can heal on their own. However, if you account for legendary artifacts from the Age of Gods, even greater possibilities emerge. For example, the sacred scabbard Avalon granted to King Arthur renders her practically immortal through miraculous healing. It halts Artoria's aging and restores her body even from the most fatal of wounds. So long as her brain remains intact, any injury she incurs will be undone. Artoria would have never fallen if she hadn't lost her precious scabbard prior to the Battle of Camlon. Those who later discovered Avalon could use its healing prowess for themselves. Strategically, a mage can use it as a safety measure, allowing them to utilize magecraft that would otherwise kill their body. With the combined power of Excalibur and the lance Rongo-Minyad, Artoria is able to survive the Battle of Camlon in the event that her knight, Sir Bedivere, refuses to return her sword to the Lady of the Lake. While not a complete recovery, the lance preserves Artoria's life while eroding her mind. She is eventually turned into a divine spirit, no longer in touch with her humanity. Her knights, Balin and Percival, wield the Holy Lance of Longinus, granting them protective and healing properties, in addition to the lance's destructive might. What should have ascended to heaven, along with the Holy Grail, instead remained on Earth, and even though it was deemed too powerful for any one knight to handle, it became Percival's noble phantasm, Longinus Count Zero, Shining Spear of Destiny. It's likely that the Holy Grail discovered by Sir Galahad could also heal people. More likely, however, mages will encounter the lesser or greater Grail from a Holy Grail war. The former is an enormous collection of mana, and it can bring about miracles when it isn't corrupted by Angra Mainyu. The latter is an elaborate spell capable of reaching the root. If a mage uses it as an opportunity to acquire true magic, healing can be accomplished through a variety of means. Aoko Aozaki, for instance, uses her fifth magic, Magic Blue, to rearrange time to postpone the death of her friend Sojuro. Other legendary artifacts, such as the Tamate Bako chronicled in the tale of Urashima Taro, can grant wishes just like the Grail can. When the land of Agartha is brought to life in a singularity, the Tamate Bako can be found in the underwater Dragon Palace. The Greek hero Asclepius, legendarily known as the god of medicine, once created a cure for death itself. His potion, made from the blood of Gorgon, was truly capable of resurrecting the dead. He used it to revive Glaucus, the son of King Minos, as well as Hippolytus, the son of Theseus. Such a potion disrupted the balance between the Olympian gods. If mortals could avoid death, then the underworld of Hades would lose its purpose. To maintain order, Zeus struck Asclepius down with godly thunder. It is unlikely that this healing potion still exists, but when Asclepius appears as a servant, his noble phantasm, resurrection-fraught Hades, becomes available. David, father of King Solomon in Israel, owned a harp of healing that allowed him to purify and exorcise evil spirits. It may not be able to heal physical wounds, but it is capable of preserving and restoring the minds of those who hear his music. Healing of the mind is still healing after all. Needless to say, trying to acquire any of these artifacts is akin to fighting an uphill battle. Instead of relying on miracles, mages have more corrupt means of healing themselves. By coveting the power of true ancestors, mages can become dead apostles, acquiring a conditional form of immortality. These vampiric creatures cease aging, and their bodies regenerate so long as they continue to drink blood. Among them, the dead apostle known as Michael Roa Valdemjong has mastered the process of reincarnation, allowing him to be reborn whenever his body is slain. In one of these reincarnations, Roa is born as a French girl named Ciel. While she has her own identity, living to her teenage years before awakening as a vampire, her soul is linked with Roa's such that, until Roa is killed once and for all, her body cannot die. No matter how devastating her injuries, the world will see her death as a contradiction and rewind her internal time to reverse any damage. This is a curse, as Ciel wishes to die, but can't until she first destroys Roa. The true ancestors themselves have an internal storage of energy that allows them to regenerate when wounded. This healing is put to the test when Shiki Tono uses his mystic eyes of death perception to slice Arcuate Brunstud into 17 pieces. Recovering from this costs Arcuate about 80% of her power, and until she can recover this expended energy, she is particularly vulnerable to further attacks. In the event that Arcuate's body is completely destroyed, she possesses a failsafe given to her as an avatar of the planet. all the compressed mana in her body will release, taking the form of a luminary or luminous body. So long as her soul remains, Gaia will grant her this form to effectively reset the world. The true ancestors can also heal others. During his fight with the dead apostle known as Nero Chaos, Shiki Tono's body is severely wounded. In an unorthodox fashion, Arcuade repairs Shiki by fusing him with some of Nero's leftover familiars. Our final example, and perhaps the one I find most interesting, is the unconventional way that the mystic eyes of death perception can be used to cure illnesses. As I've mentioned in previous lessons, these mystic eyes can see the end of things, which includes inanimate objects. Slicing the death lines of a bed, for example, will cause it to break apart. This also applies to concepts. Thinking herself to have been stabbed in the abdomen with a knife, the demon hunter Fujino Asagami went on a rampage with her telekinetic powers. In truth, the pain she felt in her abdomen was caused by a terminal case of appendicitis, which she was feeling for the very first time, along with the awakening of her powers. Shiki Ryogi, when confronting Fujino, decided not to kill the girl, but rather kill her appendicitis. Instead of dying, Fujino was able to recover after several months. I can't help but wonder if Shiki realizes the full implications of this power. So long as an illness can be properly visualized, Shiki can kill it. It's possible that even the crestworms, the ones fused to Sakura's nerves, could be safely removed with the eyes of death perception. If it weren't for the concealment of mystery, Shiki could become the world's most renowned surgeon. In summation, healing is a relatively common branch of Magecraft. Healing spells function by restoring damaged flesh to its original form. Their potential is determined by the severity of damage and potential of their caster. Generally, mages in the modern era lack the means to revive someone who has already died, though they can save someone on the brink of death. This can be done with standard healing spells, runes, or spiritual healing like the kind used by Kirei Kotomine. With the aid of ancient artifacts, miracles in healing can be achieved. Also, by discarding their humanity, mages can unlock new abilities as dead apostles. While it is far more efficient to protect oneself from damage in the first place, a proper knowledge of healing is critical to a mage's survival. By its very nature, mystery is often difficult to quantify. That said, there are mages who yearn to put ranks and parameters to different abilities. The process of categorizing supernatural phenomena can be very helpful. Thus, for our next lesson, I aim to discuss alignments and parameters. In our previous lesson, I covered various ways in which mages are able to heal their wounds and overcome death. Opting for something more concrete, I'd like to focus today's lesson on ways we can categorize mystery. While this seems counterintuitive, it is helpful that mages have ways of quantifying supernatural phenomena. Specifically, there are ways to describe the character of different beings, mainly heroic spirits, which helps to infer the kinds of spells and abilities they possess. In addition, the strength of these abilities can also be ranked to give us an idea of how dangerous or effective they are. Thus, it is time to discuss both alignments and parameters. The first thing to note is that the alignment I speak of today is not the same as one's affinity toward one element or another. Rather, this is meant to describe the alignment of one's personality. While these rules can apply to ordinary humans, they are most helpful regarding servants, as their alignments are recorded as part of their saint graphs into the throne of heroes. Masters can glean this information from their servants after forging a contract, and other ways, such as the simulator at Chaldea, can also calculate it. The human mind is complex and difficult to give qualitative assessment, but on a reductive level, we can simplify one's mentality into two aspects: their principle and personality. Personalities fall into a moral spectrum, ranging from good to evil, with neutrality between them. This is less of an objective moral standard, and more a measure of how one feels about their own actions. Does one strive for benevolence? Do they relish in malice? Perhaps a person has no moral compass whatsoever, and so their actions are merely calculative or reactionary. Each of these personality types is paired with a principle, which describes how a person acts out their will. This ranges from lawful to chaotic, with neutrality also between them. Lawful people are orderly and predictable, whereas chaotic people are spontaneous and impulsive. The combination of principle and personality can result in very different mental states and philosophies. Believe it or not, the three great kings, Arthur Pendragon, Alexander the Great, and Gilgamesh, all base their actions in benevolence. It is their approach to goodness that sets them apart. Artoria, for instance, seeks salvation for her people in a lawful manner. She follows a code of chivalry while aiming for a peaceful and prosperous Britain. She holds herself to a higher standard, one which supersedes her own personal desires. Gilgamesh, on the other hand, was entrusted to be the mediator between humanity and the gods. Arrogant in his youth, he ruled according to his own whims, believing that his kingdom is best off under his strict tyranny. He takes bold actions, many of which outsiders would deem evil and selfish. However, in the long run, he sincerely feels his actions are ideal for the betterment of mankind. Iskandar, Alexander the Great, falls in the middle, embodying the spirit of conquest. He feels goodness comes from exploring the unknown and achieving greatness. Thus, he conquers other nations, not to humiliate or condemn them, but rather to expand his territory as a natural course of action. All three of them have a sense of justice, but their approaches to it transform them into wholly different individuals. Neutrality is fascinating in how it has no basis in morality. Such people act towards some goal or desire, regardless of whether it's good or bad. Diarmid of the Knights of Fianna, for instance, lives by swearing fealty to his lord. He values honor greatly, but his loyalty takes precedent. His is a lawful neutrality. In contrast, we have someone like Frankenstein's monster, who is born into the world through a scientific experiment. She is naive and childlike, with her only motive being to find a spouse. In pursuit of this, she both loves and kills on a whim, still trying to understand the world around her. Mordred is also chaotic neutral, as her only goal is to seek Arthur's validation, regardless of whether that makes her a friend or a foe. Creative types are often truly neutral, embracing both good and evil for its dramatic merit. William Shakespeare, for instance, celebrates the beauty of romance and tragedy, often exploring them simultaneously. The very base personality of Shiki Dyogi, the one connected to the root with an origin of void, is without question one of the strongest entities in our universe, and yet she has absolutely no desires of her own. Her only motive in using her power is to grant the wish of someone else. It should go without saying that evil people commit atrocities, enacting cruelty without remorse. Someone like Charles Henri Sanson, for instance, is lawful evil because he executed royalty during the French Revolution as an occupation. He knew the horrors of his actions, but proceeded according to protocol. Artoria's alter form is also able to commit evil, if that's what it takes to keep Britain safe. Medea of Colchis, on the other hand, committed evils against her will. If not for a curse forcing her to love Jason of the Argonauts, her life would have taken an entirely different turn. Thus, she is neutral, and how she is evil without wanting to be. On the far end of the spectrum, someone like Gilles de Rais is chaotic evil, in that he tortured and murdered countless children as part of his delusional attempt to invoke God's wrath upon him. Similarly, Elizabeth Bathory murdered various young women, believing that their blood would keep her skin young and beautiful. The line between chaotic good and chaotic evil can be difficult to navigate. Bathory, for instance, didn't technically consider her actions evil, but she nonetheless continued out of her own selfishness. One could easily argue that Gilgamesh's actions were just as evil, if not more so, but in his case, he was aiming toward a proper utopia in his own right. In a rare and interesting case, the servant Nursery Rhyme happens to change her alignment depending on her master. Either way, knowing a spirit's alignment can be useful. Chaotic servants, for example, are more likely to be summoned as berserkers. At the very least, they are inherently compatible with that class. Lawful servants, on the other hand, may find themselves aligning with the knight classes Saber, Lancer, or Archer. In the absence of a catalyst, servants are summoned based on their compatibility with a master. Thus, if you understand your own alignment, it's possible to predict what servants suit you best. That said, these are not set rules. They are merely guidelines that help us make sense of heroic spirits. In addition to alignment, various aspects of Magecraft can be ranked according to a set of parameter rules based on relative power. It is a versatile rating system used to evaluate the strength of attacks, spells, and other attributes. For the most part, it follows what you might see from a traditional school rubric, where material is scored from A to E, with A being the highest ranked. An exception exists with the rank of EX, which represents a score that goes beyond numerical value. There are other exceptions as well, such as BB from the Moon Cell, utilizing stars in lieu of an EX rank. Sometimes a skill or noble phantasm is unconventional, making it impossible to measure. These would include Heroic Spirit Emiya's Unlimited Blade Works and Sasaki Kojiro's Tsubame Gaeshi. In these cases, you'll see a question mark or simply no classification at all. Additionally, any of these lettered ranks can be paired with the modifiers plus or minus. These are seen in cases where servants power themselves up or have trouble stabilizing their abilities. Effectively, this means that an ability ranked at B could be upgraded to B+ or more, rivaling or even exceeding a rank A ability. When measuring the strength of attacks, one has to count both the weapon and user as separate. A weapon may have its own inner strength, but since it's up to its wielder to bring out that strength, a specific attack's ranking may vary. The same logic applies to spells in Magecraft, and we can also rank a mage's magical resistance. Any Magecraft ranked A or above is nothing to be scoffed at. It is said that spells ranked A+ are nearly on par with true magic. Servants have their basic statistics categorized this way. Things like their strength, endurance, and agility can be readily mapped out, making it easier to determine who might win in a given fight. Strength refers to their bodily might, while endurance refers to how much damage they can take before being incapacitated. Agility is, naturally, a servant's speed of movement, the timing of their reactions. Magical energy is ranked according to how much mana a servant can hold at a given time. Among these, luck is fascinating, in that it refers to a servant's ability to overcome the odds placed against them. A high luck stat can help servants survive attacks that would otherwise kill them. Inversely, even the strongest of servants can be struck with misfortune, causing them to perish from far weaker threats. The power of a servant's noble phantasm is also ranked, and are categorized separately from their strength, as sometimes a servant's legend far exceeds their normal physical strength. Of course, it's always important to remember that certain abilities are more or less powerful in given situations. Base statistics are heavily influenced by the strength of a servant's master. Medusa, for instance, is an incredibly weak servant when under the command of Shinji Mato, making it so that her true potential is only revealed when she's a proper servant of Sakura. Generally, a servant's stats will be optimized when fighting in the territory their legends hail from. In the worst-case scenario, a servant outside of their home country will be a fish out of water. Based on their alignment, some servants will have better stats when summoned into specific classes. There are a variety of skills that servants possess that are also ranked on the same scale. Berserkers often have madness enhancement, with higher-ranking instances trading a servant's intelligence for raw power. Independent action allows some servants to operate away from their masters. In strong cases, a servant can linger in this world for a while, even after their contract with the master is severed. A riding skill can allow servants to ride and/or pilot other vehicles even without prior experience. While Artoria is summoned as a saber, her riding skill lets her drive cars and motorcycles as though they were her horses back in Camelot. The quality and capacity of a mage's magic circuits can also be measured with the same ranking scale. Naturally, these stats will differ heavily between mages living during the Age of Gods and those born into the Age of Man. In some cases, a mage can theoretically increase their potential by going back in time, allowing them to perform spells that were otherwise impossible. Practically speaking, this can be done using Chaldea's ray-shifting technology or the Shadow Border's ability to zero sail. When traveling to a different period in time, Chaldea assigns their destinations a ranking based on how important they are to the foundation of humanity. Typically, the further back you go, the more crucial a time period becomes for mankind's development. In summation, we use parameters and alignments to make sense of mystery, which is otherwise elusive. By categorizing people's minds into groups, such as lawful good or chaotic evil, we can determine how compatible they are with us, and how well we can best utilize their abilities. Said abilities are ranked by letter, so we can tell just how effective they are. Gathering and understanding this information can mean life or death for a mage, so be sure to absorb what I've covered. While we're still on the topic of heroic spirits, for our next lesson, I wish to speak of the various catalysts mages have used to summon their respective servants. In our previous lesson, I covered the ways in which mages rank and classify mystery. For the most part, these rankings pertain to the parameters and abilities of heroic spirits. Keeping to the same topic, I would like to focus this lesson on another aspect of heroic spirits, that being the various catalysts used to summon them. In lieu of a generalized process, we will go over plenty of examples. Consider it more of a history lesson than a practical one. Of course, a comprehensive understanding of myths and legends will always aid in Magecraft, even if only tangentially. The process of summoning a heroic spirit is a masterful achievement of modern Magecraft on its own. Gaining control over which servant you summon is an even greater feat. By default, most summoning rituals will pair a master with a servant that best matches their personality and likeness. Horrible, twisted masters will likely summon equally nightmarish servants, and vice versa. This by itself is a perfectly functional system, but its main flaw is that it in no way guarantees a strong servant. As such, potential masters desire a means by which they can guarantee a specific summon. Enter catalysts, symbols and holy relics recovered throughout history. They are, quite literally, relics of the past, inextricably linked to specific legends. These can be weapons, armor, treasured items, or even preserved fragments of bone or genetic material. Even outside the Holy Grail Wars, catalysts are valuable for their mystery alone. The Mages Association, for instance, has been collecting potential catalysts for centuries. When the Yggdrasilania clan chose to rebel against the Association, they only did so after amassing their own stockpile of catalysts. Let us begin by discussing the most versatile catalyst, the Round Table. Artoria Pendragon once commissioned the Round Table to serve as a means of sitting with her fellow knights without a distinguished hierarchy. Rather than lord and subject, they were all heroes, and the table represented their bond. Various fragments of the Round Table have survived to the modern era, each one being capable of summoning one of the knights. While they seem like ordinary pieces of finished wood, they emit heat when touched. Given that all the knights in Arthur's court are strong, capable fighters, these shards sell for tremendous prices. Their allure has provoked merchants to sell counterfeit shards. The mage Kairi Shishigo used an authentic piece to summon Mordred, the Knight of Rebellion, only for her to destroy it in disgust. Sir Galahad's shield, Lord Camelot, is made from parts of the Round Table and represents a place where heroes assemble. In that regard, it is the ultimate catalyst, allowing the Chaldea Security Organization to summon virtually any servant recorded in their database. It is the pinnacle of summoning, a perfected state of the ritual. That said, it is one of a kind, still justifying the need for most masters to obtain their own unique catalysts. King Arthur herself cannot be summoned from a shard of the Round Table. Rather, she requires a more powerful catalyst, one that is linked exclusively to her. This is Avalon, the underappreciated scabbard of Excalibur. During her life, Artoria was rendered nearly invincible with Avalon in her possession, but before her death at the Battle of Camlon, her sheath was stolen from her. In the modern era, it was discovered and excavated from Cornwall for the Ainsburn family to use in their Fourth Holy Grail War. For that same war, Cainith El Malloy Archibald ordered a relic to be delivered from Macedonia. It was a piece of Iskandar's mantle, or cape. In the past, Iskandar's nameless body double, sometimes mistaken for Hephaestion, wore her king's cape, and after a part of it was severed by a sword in battle, that piece was entrusted to her. As a result, the mantle is capable of summoning not just Iskandar himself, but also his body double as a Faker-class servant. Back when the Ainsburn family sought to win the Grail by violating the war's rules, they summoned an Avenger servant, Angra Mainyu, an embodiment of all the world's evils. He is a Zoroastrian figure, an ordinary man forced to bear the burden of evil to liberate his fellow villagers. Those same villagers inscribed a text, Avesta, which detailed the laws of order. Cruelly, the man who became Angermainu did not have his name included in Avesta, ironically freeing him from that order. The book itself is used when summoning him, and his noble phantasm is an imitation of it. The Greek hero Jason, along with his famed Argonauts, which include Asclepius, Atalante, and Heracles, can be summoned via their legendary ship, the Argo. Like the Round Table, pieces of the Argo can be found scattered across the globe. While Medea has a profound connection to the Argo, she can also be summoned through texts from her kingdom of Colchis. For the Fifth Grail War in Fuyuki, the mage Atram Galiasta summoned her with the charred remains of the Golden Fleece. This fleece was a gift to Medea's father, a coat made from the winged ram Chrysomalos. Jason came to Colchis looking to steal it, and after being cursed into loving him, Medea helped him escape with it in tow. Presumably, the Golden Fleece was guarded by a dragon, leading many to believe that possessing it would allow them to summon a dragon. In truth, however, even if one were to summon a dragon, they would also require the means to control it. As such, not even Medea herself uses it for that purpose. Heracles, too, can be summoned from the Argo, but for the Fifth Grail War, the Ainsburns instead used a different catalyst. One of the hero's weapons, a nameless axe sword, was carved from an ancient temple and exists in the modern era for mages to uncover. Yet again, the renowned teacher Cheiron shares a connection to the Argo, but more unique to him is the legend of his death. Heracles accidentally shot Cheiron with an arrow dipped in a hydra's venom. Despite being immortal, the venom caused Cheiron so much pain that he relinquished his divinity in order to die without suffering. This very arrow, stained by Cheiron's blood, can be used to summon him. The Celtic hero Cuchulainn, Ireland's Child of Light, once wore a pair of silver earrings, each engraved with original runes. The mage Bazette Fraga Micremitz inherited these earrings, and while she wore them, they also served as her catalyst in summoning Cuchulainn for the Fifth Grail War. As a heroic spirit, he retains the earrings he wore in life, essentially creating a duplicate. The same phenomenon occurs with heroic spirit Emiya, the servant form of Shiro Emiya. His master, Rin Tosaka, inherited a unique memento from her late father. It was a one-of-a-kind jewel pendant containing 10 years' worth of Rin's mana. This tremendous power was used to revive Shiro from the brink of death. After waking up from his injuries, Shiro found this pendant and kept it close until his dying day. When his legend was recorded into the Throne of Heroes, Rin became capable of summoning him using her version of the pendant as a catalyst. When this happened, Emiya arrived possessing his own version of it. Along with the pendant, Rin also inherited the catalyst her father used in the previous Grail War, the fossilized shell of the first snake in the world to shed its skin. It is a relic directly related to King Gilgamesh. In an attempt to overcome death, Gilgamesh once sought out an herb of immortality from the underworld. Upon obtaining it, he let his guard down while resting at a nearby spring, during which a snake slithered by and devoured his herb, shedding its skin to show that the herb was a youth potion rather than a means of avoiding death altogether. Even if Rin wanted to use this catalyst, it would not have worked because Gilgamesh remained alive past the Fourth Grail War. Of course, Gilgamesh searched for immortality after his dearest friend Enkidu was taken from him. Almost equally famous, Enkidu can also be summoned as a servant under the right circumstances. A mage hoping to fight in a Grail War created a familiar, a wolf creature. This wolf was meant to be used as a catalyst for the mage to summon his servant, but as fate would have it, the wolf wound up inheriting his command spells. Outraged, the mage began to abuse and torture his own creation, and when it screamed out hoping to survive, Enkidu responded to its call. I admit this is very unconventional, the product of trying to make one's catalyst a living being with a will of its own. It goes against the very point of having a catalyst, which is to lure in a specific servant from the throne. A more straightforward example can be seen when summoning Frankenstein's monster for the Great Grail War in Trifas. The Yggdrasilania clan targeted her using the original blueprints Dr. Frankenstein made to build her. After tens of thousands of aborted children were cast away in London's Whitechapel district, they formed a human shape that went on to murder prostitutes in a futile effort to return to the womb. This killer, Jack the Ripper, left behind her 6 knives, which eventually found their way to the mage Hyoma Sagara. Similar to Enkidu, Jack did not respond to Hyoma's call, but rather the cry of his captive, Reika. Nefertari was the first and most adored queen of Pharaoh Ozymandias in Egypt. He believed her to be an incarnation of the goddess Hathor, and he cherished her above all his other queens. Her golden necklace survives into the modern era, where it can be used to summon Ozymandias as a servant. Perhaps, if Nefertari were famous enough to be a hero in her own right, the necklace would summon her. It is a fascinating idea. After all, there are cases like the Round Table and Argo, which can be used to summon one of several different candidates. Such is the case for the God-felling crossbow, a weapon used by Qin Shi Huang that survived long after his demise. Rather than summoning its associated Chinese emperor, it actually became the catalyst to the spirit Jiao, who was once the bow's victim. This bears the same logic as trying to summon a hero like Achilles, using the arrow that struck his tendon. Siegfried's most famous anecdote comes from him slaying the dragon Fafnir. The dragon's blood poured out, washing over and covering Siegfried's body, with the exception of a linden leaf that stuck to his back. It left behind a spot on Siegfried that would become his weak point. The leaf, having been soaked in dragon's blood, was preserved over the years before finding its way to a mage family. It would later be used to bring back Siegfried from his mortal coil. One of the most dangerous catalysts comes from King Solomon. According to legend, he was bestowed by God a set of 10 rings, granting him vast wisdom. During his life, Solomon would wind up returning 9 of these rings back to God. The 10th ring, however, remained into the modern era, where it was obtained by Marisbury Animasphere. The absence of this final ring is one way to distinguish the real Solomon from his imitation put on by his demon god familiars. No other servant was able to leave behind such a threat to the human order. Thus, we can be thankful that Marisbury used the 10th ring to summon the real Solomon, who went on to resolve the conflict. In summation, catalysts are relics of the past that, even if damaged, can be acquired in the modern era by mages. Because they are remnants of legend, they are used to summon the heroic spirits associated with them. While a great many catalysts have already been gathered by the Mages Association, there are clearly others that find their way to unaffiliated mages. If a master is compatible with a given servant, they may not need a catalyst, but there are also cases where a summoned servant can find use for their own catalyst. For example, Artoria becomes far more powerful when reunited with Avalon. In that regard, catalysts are worth preserving even without using them to summon servants. Hopefully, this has been a nice diversion from the norm. For our next lesson, I wish to return to basics by speaking of the 3 essential components that comprise all living beings. That is, the mind, body, and soul, as well as their relevance to the cyber frames utilized by the Moon Cell. In our previous lesson, I covered various catalysts that mages use to summon heroic spirits. Moving forward, we will be focusing on something much broader. For that, we must ask the question, what does it mean to be alive? More specifically, what are the components that make up a living being? There are 3 such components: the body, mind, and soul. Generally, without the presence of all of them, the longevity of a person's existence becomes unstable. Thus, today's lesson will cover these components, both in how they relate to our reality, as well as simulated worlds like the Moon Cell. Let us start by differentiating these elements. One's body is the simplest to understand. It is our vessel in the physical plane, a collection of proteins, fat, bones, and electrons that give us our appearance and functionality. That functionality can decrease when damaged, with death being the state when the body shuts down. Countless things harm our bodies, most notably the passage of time. In the absence of mystery in Magecraft, death is inevitable, whether we sustain injury or succumb to the natural causes of aging. Because Magecraft is concealed from the general public, and the age of gods is far behind us, it's not hard to see how many civilians believe that life is simply the process of having a functioning body. Without proof of the supernatural, there wouldn't be a need to delve further. Since we are mages, however, the truth is far more intriguing. The most critical organ in the body is, of course, the brain, where we process thoughts. Naively, one might think that one's mind and brain are one and the same, but that simply isn't the case. The mind is only one part of what makes up our memories and personality. To clarify, the mind is what comprises the personality and memories of our lived experiences. It is produced over a lifetime of encounters, being shaped continuously. Perhaps you've heard of the expression nature versus nurture. Aspects of our lives can occur through either of these factors, or a combination of both. Certain animals derive much of their behavior from birth, with instincts inscribed upon them through evolution. Mammals like us, however, tend to be born vulnerable, needing to learn how to live. The mind is most similar to such learned behaviors. It is so important that many believe losing one's mind is akin to becoming an entirely different person. On the other hand, we have the idea that parts of your personality remain static, present within you always. Pessimistically, this means no matter how hard you try to change, your fundamental core remains the same. For an optimist, this brings the comforting knowledge that you will still be yourself even as your mind deteriorates. This constant aspect of our mental landscape resides in our third component, the soul. Souls exist beyond our mortal plane, in another dimension of sorts. They are immaterial by nature, made up of spirit particles, or spiritrons. Of the three components of a living being, the soul is certainly the most important, as it contains a record of the body and mind. It is also where our magic circuits are stored, which explains why we need spiritual doctors like Kirei Kotomine to cleanly extract or transfer them. Now, a common misconception is that because casting spells exerts us physically, our circuits must be attached to the body. In truth, the distinction is much foggier due to the soul needing a physical body to maintain its own form. As such, a lot of bodily procedures in Magecraft actually utilize both the body and soul in tandem. Changes to the body can affect the soul, just as much as changes to the soul can show up physically. For example, the soul contains genetic records of its host body, such that if a soul finds a new vessel, it can shape that vessel to match its original form. Generally speaking, souls that lose their bodies will disperse and return to the root from which they came. They are the one part of us that is immortal, but that's not quite as reassuring as it sounds. While mages often seek immortality, we cannot simply continue to transfer our souls between new bodies without consequence. Doing so causes the soul to rot and degrade. It may not completely disappear, but degradation will slowly but surely alter a soul's structure, in turn altering one's body and mind by extension. Only the most desperate of mages take this route, such as Zoken Mato, whose soul jumping has caused his possessed bodies to rot and his mind to stray from his humble intentions for the Holy Grail. Those intentions were, of course, to restore the third magic of Heaven's Feel, which is capable of materializing souls. Not only can this magic safely transfer souls from one body to the next without rotting, it can also allow souls to exist independently from the body. It is thanks to Heaven's Feel that Shiro Emiya is able to survive after his body is completely destroyed during the Fifth Holy Grail War. Ilyasville von Einsburn, using her Dress of Heaven, preserved his soul until it could be transferred to a new body, one built by the mage Toko Aozaki. The Japanese hero, Shiro Amakusa Tokisada, seeks Heaven's Feel so that he can free all souls of their bodies as part of his utopian vision. Some think living exclusively as souls would be ideal, though plenty also insist that our corporeal forms are essential. At the very least, it seems controversial to force that vision onto others without their consent. As far as bodies are concerned, it's thought that only one soul can inhabit a single body at a time, though there are some exceptions. Homunculi such as Ilyasville and her mother Airi were created and modified to be able to hold several souls. It's what allows them to serve as vessels for the Lesser Grail. The homunculus Sieg can channel the soul of Siegfried into his own body through the use of a command spell. Keep in mind that doing so is both temporary and costly. Then there's Hassan of 100 Faces, whose soul is compartmentalized, split into various souls. In life, this resulted in him having multiple personalities. As a heroic spirit, he was essentially freed from his body, allowing each of those souls to manifest independently. Fundamentally, that's what servants are, souls that inhabit bodies made of mana, tethered to our plane via a contract with the Grail or the planet's will. Without a steady supply of mana, heroic spirits vanish just like any other soul. Some malicious servants will opt to replenish their mana by feeding on other people's souls. Other spiritual beings, such as wraiths and unicorns, can do the same. While Magecraft can be used for humans to devour or merge with other souls, doing so is dangerous. The more it happens, the less the original human is able to remain themselves. Narrow Chaos, for example, has fused with so many other creatures that his own identity has been lost in the shuffle. With every incarnation, Michael Roa Valdemyong's sense of self blends in with those he possesses. It's worth noting that not all souls are considered equal. They have both purity and weight. Souls can start off pure and degrade over time. Becoming a heroic spirit often causes a soul to become more dense, potentially increasing its value. Gilgamesh, for example, has a soul worth hundreds of ordinary human souls. When defeated in a Holy Grail war, his soul fills the Lesser Grail far more than his competitors. Arguably the most comprehensive ritual regarding a person's living components was conducted in the Blackmoor Cemetery. There, a village worshipping Morgan Le Fay set out to try and resurrect King Arthur by combining her body, mind, and soul from different sources. To recreate Artoria's mental landscape, they made use of the Atlas superweapon Logos React, which can calculate complex simulations. For Artoria's body, they bore generations of children looking for a proper vessel. Eventually, they acquired Grey, a village girl whose physical shape horrifically transformed to match that of the king's. To obtain Artoria's soul, the villagers anticipated the Fifth Holy Grail War, betting on her to return as one of the servants. Because Grey was fundamentally her own person, that meant she had her own unique mind and soul to contend with. Since all the village needed was her body, they passed down a mystic code called Erosion, a dagger capable of separating a person's three components. Considering how tragic this would have been, I'm glad to announce that this ritual never actually came to pass. Lastly, I want to shift focus onto the Moon Cell. There, mages are effectively diving into a virtual environment via Spiritron hacking. While their real bodies remain on Earth, their mind and soul inhabit the Moon Cell's environment, Seraph, using what are called cyberframes. Just like in reality, cyberframes also consist of a mind, body, and soul. This is most relevant when Hakuno Kishinami, one of Seraph's inhabitants, is captured by the Titan Altera. In order to escape, their cyberframe splits into its three components, each manifesting individually for a time thanks to the power of the Regalia, a key item within the Moon Cell that commands its many functions. Hakuno's mind finds its way to the servant Nero and becomes her master. Hakuno's soul partners with Tamamo no Mae, and their body stays behind as Altera's captive. This proves to be but a temporary fix to Hakuno's dilemma, as their cyberframe deteriorates while its pieces remain separate. Normally, we would not be able to witness a body, mind, and soul individually, but each of these aspects has its own avatar in the Moon Cell. In summation, humans and other living creatures are each composed of a mind, body, and soul. All three are required for the others to exist. The body is literally our vessel in the physical world, and our brain is what lets us form our mind and consciousness. Intimately connected with the other two is the soul, which cannot exist in our reality without a body. Of the three components, the soul is the most important and versatile, but unless it is handled correctly, it can degrade as mages desperately seek immortality. Currently, the only way to preserve a soul outside its body is through the use of Heaven's Feel, though doing so carries its own moral quandary. For our next lesson, I want to revisit the idea of phantasmal species. In particular, I will further elaborate on Faeries, which happen to be far more diverse than originally demonstrated. In our previous lesson, I covered body, mind, and soul, the three aspects that make up living beings. This mainly applies to humans and other mortal creatures. Gods and phantasmal species, for instance, shake things up a bit, for a lack of better words. One such phantasmal species are the Fae, nature spirits created to be extensions of the planet, serving as its sense of touch, much like the true ancestors. They are distinct enough from humanity and other species that, for today's lesson, I aim to flesh out and illustrate the details we know about them. Like most phantasmals, beings tied to mystery, fairies are nowhere near as common today as they were in the Age of Gods. That said, fairies made their way to the reverse side of the world much more slowly. In the British Isles especially, they lingered long enough to influence heroes like King Arthur. This includes lesser fairies who helped in the construction of Camelot, and greater fairies like Vivian, the Lady of the Lake, who bestowed Arthur with both Avalon and Excalibur. Even to this day, fairies do interact with our world, though we usually can't see them outside of a couple of rare exceptions. One exception is Glam Sight, a type of mystic eye that grants its owner an ability to see fairies. For example, the mage Wills Pelham Codrington received a pair of glam eyes that his father, Trevor, had purchased from Rael Zeppelin. Trevor was obsessed with fairies and hoped to command them as his servants. To that end, he designed a workshop that would amplify his son's eyes. Unable to contact any real fairies, though, Trevor began to murder humans and use them to create artificial fairies. These took the form of black dogs, carnivorous fairies associated with crossroads and the wild hunt. As an embodiment of storms, they devour lightning, souls, and even other fairies. To put a stop to this workshop, an actual fairy who had been deceived by Trevor turned on and killed him. Her name was, quite appropriately, Fae, and she strove to free the land from Trevor's intrusive magecraft. Sadly, killing him wasn't enough to dismantle the workshop, and so Fae reached out to Wills for help. Not only could Wills see and speak with Fae, he could also grant those abilities to his companions through the use of magic dust and the workshop's amplification of his eyes. Together, he and his allies slayed the black dogs. It is said that those who can see fairies are easily enchanted by them. Perhaps this is why Wills ultimately decided to travel back with Fae to her fairylands. Whether or not their love was genuine, I cannot say. What I can speak to, however, is what is meant by the term fairylands. Just as they returned to the reverse side of the world, fairies were also born there. The shape of the reverse side is ambiguous, often being referred to as the inner sea of the planet, the very same place where fairies initially forged Excalibur from the wishes of mankind. This inner sea is called Avalon. In Celtic mythology, it is the land of youth, Tir na Nog. Christians might even call it the Garden of Eden. Wills's opportunity to venture there with his beloved is quite rare. For others, such as heroic spirit Emmia, reaching Avalon requires endless pursuit. It's not unheard of, though, as Sir Bedivere of the Round Table was able to find Avalon whilst wandering in agony after failing to return Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake. Mages like Merlin, who have an intimate bond with fairies, seem capable of entering and leaving Avalon at will. That is, when they're not being trapped in the Garden of Avalon's tower. Under the right conditions, it's also possible to traverse to the planet's inner sea by following a path carved out by the dragon Albion. The Eyes of Glam Sight can do more than just perceive fairies. One mage, Norma Goodfellow, is able to sense other phantasmal species, unique magical auras, and even high-speed movements. These prove valuable as she explores the seventh labyrinth of Callback Alcatraz. Within that labyrinth, she encounters a breed of fairy that specifically eats humans. While some fairies might be amicable, others are downright deadly. It's worth noting that fairies themselves possess unique eyes called Fae eyes that let them see through lies and deception. Glam eyes and Fae eyes are entirely separate, so try not to mix them up. As I mentioned regarding Trevor Codrington, artificial or otherwise illegitimate fairies can emerge in the form of fallen gods, magecraft experiments, or unsated grudges. The true authenticity of a fairy comes from being born from the inner sea, making them divided spirits of Gaia's will. As embodiments of mystery, they do not require magecraft formulas, codes, nor circuits to channel mystery. Instead, they have divine or fairy patterns that channel mana in a far more efficient manner. The strongest among them are referred to as great fathers and mothers. Regardless of their strength, however, fairies don't require food. Their nourishment, oddly enough, comes from the presence of humans. Rather than actual metabolic energy, fairies gain a kind of spiritual fulfillment simply by being next to humans. As an extension of this, fairies have taken on many aspects of human culture and will often eat or throw parties based on what they've observed from humanity. This includes family culture, as otherwise, fairies are born independent from one another. Despite this, it's not safe to expect fairies to behave like humans on a fundamental level. Sure, there might be a superficial resemblance, but in most cases, fairies lack a sense of emotional control and rational understanding of their world. When it comes to morals, they are akin to children, acting on impulse rather than reason. This is somewhat understandable when you consider that fairies don't die, at least not traditionally. Not only do they have longer lifespans, but they also reincarnate into later generations when killed. The only thing connecting certain fairies is their purpose, which passes down from one generation to another. This purpose defines their appearance and even dictates their name. Losing track of that purpose is a surefire way for a fairy to wither away over time. One exception to these rules is Morgan Le Fay. She is unique in that, while she is still a great mother fairy, the famous Vivian from Arthurian legend, she was actually born from a human mother. Uther Pendragon and Lady Igraine birthed a child that was both a product of Gaia as well as their own conception. This caused Morgan some conflict. As a fairy, she was tasked with protecting Britain, which meant aiding Artoria as its king. As a human, she adored her sister, but ultimately became corrupt by a desire to rule Britain herself. Thus, for every time her benevolent half as Vivian would bestow Artoria with valuable treasures, her malevolent side would sabotage those efforts. It is said that both these sides manifested independently, both of them escorting Artoria to Avalon following her death in the Battle of Camlon. There are other fairies that exist in Arthurian legend. King Arthur's knight, Sir Gawain, rode upon a fairy horse named Gringolet. Another of Arthur's companions was a knight named Britomart. As a servant of the fairy queen Gloriana, she traveled the land as a master of the spear, fighting the strong in defense of the weak. She began as a human, but after her journey, she was turned into a fairy knight. Due to her human nature, she fell in love with her partner Artegal and became mother to Aurelius Corninus. As a fairy, Britomart's second generation carried on with the same name and appearance, returning to the battlefield as a chivalrous fairy knight. Native to Cornwall is a tribe of fairies called the Murian. These supposedly beautiful creatures were fated to shrink with every incarnation. This is based off a belief that ants themselves are actually decaying fairy souls. Beyond those examples, Britain is far from the only nation to have interacted with fairies. Mandricardo, enemy to the 12 paladins of Charlemagne, sought the sword Durandal, which originally belonged to Hector of the Trojan War. Mandricardo's conviction was so strong that he swore an oath to the fairies that until he obtained Durandal, he would not use any other sword. In Russia, the Romanov dynasty had a contract with the nature spirit V, who reached out to Anastasia as her body was being mutilated. V has been described as both a gnome and fairy in different literature. The heroes of Ireland also interacted quite heavily with fairies. Fyr Dorha was a druid and malevolent fairy that effectively stole 7 years of youth from Finn McCool, leader of the Knights of Fianna. Dorha turned Finn's first wife into a deer, forcing Finn to spend 7 whole years searching for her in vain. Finn's subordinate, Diarmuid Dubna, was raised as a foster son by Angus Og in the company of the Tuatha De Danann, a group which included fairy kings. He later went on to duel one of these kings, Abarta, with his 2 swords. The Celtic sea god Manannán MacLír once had a fairy wife named Fand, who fell in love with Cu Chulainn of Ulster. When Cu and Fand came to ask for his blessing, Manannán erased Cu's memories of her and hid her beneath the veil of a magic cloak to prevent them from falling in love again. In that regard, fairies in Celtic mythology seemed to be interchangeable with gods and would often mingle quite closely with humans. For such a thing to happen in the modern day is almost unheard of, though it does still happen. Satsuki Kurogiri, for instance, once believed himself to have been captured by fairies as a child. In truth, he accidentally found himself among the fairies through a dream state, and he murdered them in a desperate attempt to escape. Before dying, these fairies cursed him, affecting his ability to recall future memories. It's safe to assume that such encounters are either accidental or due to human intervention, as the fairies themselves have no reason to interact with us anymore. Perhaps this is for the best, given the temperamental, often dangerous impulsivity fairies exhibit. The mage Kuro Arashino experienced this firsthand when his own students at the clock tower cast him into Albion's tomb, causing him to end up in Avalon. During this time, the fairies there stole his heart before he could escape back to the human world. In the rare event of a fairy encounter, it helps to know what sort of fairy you're dealing with. While many are of the winged variety you're familiar with, the definition of a fairy is actually quite broad. The black dogs I mentioned before are a kind of fairy, as are more humanoid forms, such as goblins. Sometimes, goblins double as changelings, humans who have been turned into fairies. Spriggans, which could be confused for golems, are actually nature spirits first and foremost. There is also a strong tie between fairies and witches, as neither race typically has children. The mother of Beryl Gut, for instance, is a witch who served as her own mother. When she made love with another human to birth Beryl, it actually spoiled her bloodline. To wrap up this lecture, let us discuss a fairy who existed in medieval times, but is most famous from a completely fictional work. Oberon has been described in folklore as an aide to the hero Huon, as well as a child of Morgan Le Fay and Julius Caesar. Most know him as the King of Fairies, but this was embellishment created by William Shakespeare in his poem A Midsummer Night's Dream. In this famous play, Oberon feuds with his fictional wife Titania over a changeling child. When Titania refuses to give up the child, Oberon resorts to taking a flower infused by Cupid's arrow to create a love potion of sorts. It enchants Titania to fall in love with the first person she sees, which accidentally happens to be a different man. Only after rectifying this mistake can Oberon and Titania find happiness. While such a tale says nothing important about the actual Oberon, should he ever be conjured as a heroic spirit, he will inherit traits from Shakespeare's work. In summation, fairies are unique phantasmal species that are born from the planet as nature spirits. They appear in all manner of folklore, sharing similarities to gods, true ancestors, and witches. Fairies are practically immortal, surviving so long as they retain their purpose and name. When they die, rather than having children, they are reincarnated again as fairies with the same purpose. While fairies remained in this world longer than other phantasmal beings, they too eventually returned to their domain in the planet's inner sea. As a result, interactions with fairies are rare in the modern era. Some fairies are noble, while others are childish and threateningly impulsive. For our next lesson, I aim to continue our discussion on phantasmal beasts by specifically focusing on dragons and the spiritual tomb of Albion. Thanks for watching.
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to Otaku Daikun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all our anime lore, discussions, and Let's Play content.
you can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or a YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like spicy exclusive vids and early access.
As always, celebrate your fandom. I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters: Video Gamer 75, Dante Pendragon, Lunar Works, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, The Nonchalant Ostrich, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Lord Ormagoden, Free Brick, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Link Pendrago, Observer Bellis, James Hewitt, Uncanny EXP, Zamas Autonomous, Yuki Eidos, Scout, Crow Kalem, Sal Soto, Tristan Riggin, Major, Meifu Mado, Caitlin P, Sogai CH, Vladimirovna, The Taz 96, Jonathan Padua, Kengo X 77, Hersha of E-Rated Hands, Alester Bernadotte, and Akakaze Yume. Thank you all so much.